Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 2, finally, of the USS Albany build. So, yeah, I know this is coming a little late, several months, but, it'd be like that sometimes. Anyways, getting under the build, you're gonna see me clicking back and forth between photo measure tool, reference images on Google Images, and from the depths a lot in this video. And I have cut parts of this footage out a little bit, just because even though it's playing at 5 times speed, if I were to not cut anything, this would be well over an hour long, and that's a little long in my opinion for From the Depths YouTube video. But anyways, you see here I'm using photo measure as well as photos of a plastic model of this ship heavily in order to get the superstructure outline correct. And once I have the outline, I generally tend to build my superstructures kind of in layers. And so Albany has a very clearly defined lower deck on her superstructure, so that made it easy to get the outline. And once again, you've had a warning in the last video about this ship being ugly. But yeah, you're gonna... Last video, it was just the hull, so it wasn't that bad. Her hull's pretty nice in my opinion. But now we get into the superstructure, and yeah, stuff's gonna go downhill. So brace yourselves. Anyways, you'll see me clicking through a lot of images once again. I couldn't find a good elevation plan of the ship, like a top-down view plan of her deck. If I can find those, it makes it a lot easier, just because I'll, obviously this drawing I'm using from Ship Bucket only shows a 2-dimensional view. But because I can't find one, I'm just going to click around through a lot of images. So I put on the upper deck here, and then I start building the mounts for her forward radars. And so Albany had a lot of very large radars, which is nice for From the Depths because, I need radar from the depths for targeting. But first I'm going to build the forward mounts for her ANSPS. I believe it was the ANSPS 49 radar controls. And these were for the Talos missiles. I will get in depth a little bit about the missiles in real life later, because these are some absurd missiles. But basically they used SAR-H guidance, semi-active radar homing, which is not a thing in From the Depths. But the closest thing there is to that is remote guidance. So I end up going with remote guidance for the missiles. And so in real life, each radar mount, you'll see there's 2 in the front, 2 in the back. So they had 1 for each missile, so they could theoretically guide the missiles onto 4 different targets. But From the Depths doesn't do that. I could do that by putting 4 different AIs and hooking each missile up to a different AI, but I'm not going to do that. So I just leave it with 2 mounts, which will both track the target in order to get better detection and have a higher hit chance. And now I start building, I don't know, the problem with this ship, maybe. Not sure why they decided her bridge needs to be this high off the water. I've heard, I'm not sure if this is just like a myth or someone actually measured this out, but allegedly Albany had the highest bridge on any Navy ship outside of nuclear aircraft carriers, which I believe that. But I lay out the bridge, I put in some balconies and stuff using alloy plates. Alloy plates really come in handy if you're trying to make any realistic themed build. Just because using full blocks for balconies, it's kind of chunky, and I don't know, it doesn't look that great. Of course, the downside is plates are super fragile, but with a ship of this size, the health reduction, health reduction that you take from getting the plates blown off isn't that bad. And so now I jump to the funnels, just kind of laying out the outline of these. And Albany is another ship. Yeah, I made a couple jokes during my United States versus Neater playthrough, which I may or may not continue. Hopefully I'll continue it. About how United States Navy in this time period was like, we can either give our ships a funnel or a mast, not both. Albany follows this rule. They went funnel. They went funnel all the way, and no mast. So extremely tall funnels, which they did mount some radar equipment and stuff on. So basically, Yep, funnel instead of a mast. And, yeah, the targeting equipment on Albany, it's interesting. A lot of the radar targeting equipment on these real-life ships, it's so much larger than in From the Depths, where you just slap down a radar block. A lot of it ends up being decorative, like it fills a purpose, but it's, you know, a lot of it is just there for being there, and then you got a tiny little 90-degree radar block or whatever in the center. So I keep laying out the funnels, and this is another instance in where photo measure tool comes in handy, just giving me the dimensions of everything, how tall they are, how wide they are at the base compared to the top. And I will use some decorations here in order to smooth this out, but it's nothing insane. I try to stay away from huge amounts of decorations on my ships, just because I find it tedious and not really worth the time. But anyways, just putting in small amounts like this, I don't find that's too time consuming, and it helps out the overall look to just give it a little bit of a more polished feel. So moving on from the funnel, start working on the rear superstructure, and some of this is just guesswork because, you know, I'm looking at the models and stuff, but it's a bit obscured. And plastic models really do help because you can get viewpoints with them that aren't super possible in real life unless, you know, you're doing a helicopter fly over the ship or something. And of course you have to trust that whatever model you're using, the guy who built the model knew what he was doing. But in my opinion, it's a decent trade to make. And so now I begin work on the rear superstructure with the aft radar mounts. And you see I'm clearing out some of the measurements I've made on this drawing because it's getting really cluttered. But yeah, so the rear superstructure, honestly the shape of the superstructure on this ship isn't that bad to build. I've done some builds before, especially like for the Finest Hour campaign, working on Japanese ships, like Fuso and Nagato, like those pagoda towers are killer. And even just the destroyers and cruisers, you know, some nations really like making superstructures with complex curves, but luckily Albany is pretty blocky, so not that much extra work that has to go in. So I finish up the radar mast. You see, I also like to, you know, I'm lazy, so I'll copy paste stuff around, which if you can make a ship with a lot of kind of modular parts, that helps a lot. You don't have to keep doing the same decorations over and over again. And so now I start working on the little mast type structure, which I guess isn't really a mast. And I find that the truss blocks come really handy for this. So I actually use the, there you go, I put decorations on them to make them invisible. And then I just get some truss blocks and make them really wide. And that's pretty much all there is to it. And then I get some poles, angle them up a bit, make sure they line up, stretch them out, and then copy paste those into all the other corners. Yeah, and then I just adjust the trusses a bit, and it's doesn't look quite as good as making every individual piece of the trusses structured with a pole, but it saves me a ton of time, and it looks decent. So in my opinion, it's more than a worthy trade. As we move on, I just am making a lot of balconies and things. There's a whole lot of just balconies and platforms for various equipment. And just these little details kind of go a long way to making a realistic build look realistic. So now I'm putting in the vents. A lot of times, honestly, vents are another thing people forget a lot. You know, ships need air, crew needs air, the engines need air. So there's these air intake vents all over the superstructures of most ships. So it's nice to slap those in there. I'm just using the radiator decoration, which is pretty simple. Don't have to do a lot of work. I generally am just copy pasting this around and adjusting its size. And then once I finish that, I start working on the crane, which I'm not that proud of, so I skipped over that part. So now I believe I'm going to begin working on the missile launchers. Well, I do take a moment first to copy-paste the crane to the front of the ship, because, you know, why build that again? Also, yeah, in the previous video, I really didn't set up the AI or anything, but I go in and set up the AIs. I have two AIs set up on Albany here. I have a primary AI, which will guide the main missiles into their targets, and then a secondary AI, which is going to control the 5-inch guns as well as the anti-aircraft missiles. And the amount of general purpose processing power, that's a tongue twister, try saying that 5 times fast, is kind of a big issue for this because the main missiles can be remote guided and they're large missiles, which take a lot. So I make sure I have enough room for that. I paste the radar in, which I already built beforehand. I do use some decorations on the radars just to give it that extra bit of realism, but honestly not that much. And even on the large main radars that you saw up there, a lot of it is just alloy blocks and steam pipes. So yeah, I didn't have room for enough processing power in the AI box, so I had to squeeze some in outside, which isn't ideal for combat, but you know, it's whatever. So then I built some little mounts for radars for the secondary battery. I believe I hooked these up to the secondary AI. And yeah, I just get a super simple tracking radar, paste that into all of the locations where it belongs. And then make sure it's hooked up to the right AI channel. And I also am going to put surge protectors all over the superstructure. They changed a couple months ago. There was an update which made it so that EMP blasts can now travel through sub-objects, so like turret spinners and things. They used to not be true, which was very nice, because the only way to disable detection equipment with EMP then was to have a EMP missile or something hit the detection turret directly, but now a blast through the hull can travel up through the superstructure and fry your radars. So surge protectors, and then for these circular dish radars, this is kind of cheeky in my opinion, and maybe more effort than it's worth, but I basically just copy paste a ton of meshes for the 90-degree radar and then just start angling them. So this quote-unquote circle is just like, you know, it's just like 11 meshes that are all at slightly different angles, so it appears like a circle. But it looks pretty decent in the end, so worth it in my opinion. And then of course there's 2 of these. Why build it again when I could just save it and paste it into the other location on the ship? So I go ahead and do that. And now I am working on the forward missile launcher. So the main weapons of the Albany was really just an anti-aircraft cruiser in real life. Its armament was 4 of these Talos anti-aircraft missiles that I'm working on the launcher for now. And then it also had 4 smaller, I believe it was the RIM 24 Tartar missiles, 4 Tartar missiles on the sides of the superstructure. And then it also had some 5-inch guns and anti-torpedo weapon, or anti-submarine weaponry. But in real life, the Talos missile, it was an anti-aircraft missile, but it used semi-active radar homing, which basically radars on the ship, which are those very 2 large radars you see looming over this missile launcher, would illuminate a target with radar waves, and then the reflection of the radar waves off the target would be picked up by a passive radar receiver on the Talos missile, and then the Talos missile would follow the reflection of the radar to the target. So I'm sure theoretically they could illuminate a ship with their radar and fire the Talos at it. And let me tell you, the Talos is one of the more ridiculous anti-aircraft missiles I've heard about. This thing was about 30 feet long in real life, about 10 meters, and it weighed about 2 tons. It weighed more than most fighter jets in service at the time. And the thing carried a warhead that was larger than like the Mark 14 torpedo. This is basically a torpedo that's flying through the air at Mach 3, which is about 1,000 meters per second, by the way. Obviously, getting a missile to go that fast and from the depths is not achievable. You see I'm setting up the missile here to just be HE, frag, thump, general purpose destruction. But basically, if you were to fire this thing at a ship, it would be like slamming a torpedo through their deck at 1 kilometer a second. Which would, whatever ship you hit this thing with is having a bad day. So I just set these up as remote guidance. They're general purpose, you can target ships with them, In real life, it had a proximity fuse, which made it effective against aircraft because the warhead was so large, you didn't have to, like, you could miss by, you know, you could miss your target aircraft by 50 feet and the missile would just obliterate everything in the area. Of course, proximity fuse doesn't exist in From the Depths, so generally these are going to be better at larger, less maneuverable targets. But, you know, it still works as a very solid main weapon, and I do make the other missiles more dedicated for targeting fast aircraft. And so while I'm building these, I'm kind of, it's going through my head like, okay, and I do just build a turret and then put another turret on top so that the missiles on the top bit can rotate up and down. It's really just an elevation turret on top of a 360-degree turret. See, I'm going through ads and stuff, trying to get the right song to play in the background, so I'm jamming to some 2 Steps from Hell as I'm building this. But, basically, I end up deciding that 4 large missiles isn't a suitable armament for a ship of this size. So I save the top turret, and then I put it on a piston here, and I spin clip it to be inside of the other turret. And then I hook that up to a different missile receiver. You see I'm setting those to channel 2, so that the first missiles will fire, and then 15 seconds later the second missiles will fire. So it will appear as if it's just one missile system that reloads twice as fast as a normal missile system, but it's actually 2. So a little bit of debauchery going on with that spin clipping, but I think it's justified. In real life, these missiles fed out of a magazine, which is why they used an arm launcher that would be below them, and they had something like 106 rounds. So unlike VLS cells, these things were totally reloadable, and they'd be expected to reload in combat. I set the idle elevation angle, which I have to do 2 times because there's 2 different launchers. But, you know, I gotta have the missiles looking intimidating like that. So those are the Talos missiles. Of course, I now go and spawn in a Marauder, because, you know, what else would you test your ships on? And yeah, the remote guidance isn't set up properly. As you can see, they're missing their targets. So I go in and finick with this. I cut out a bunch of it because watching me repeatedly mess with the missile controller and then miss the target and then mess with the missile controller more is not ideal. But yeah, I had forgotten to put the actual remote guidance module into the missile, which is, you know, classic. Slightly embarrassing moment there. And so I mess with that a bit. I make sure the general purpose processing thing is set up right. I try to get the missiles to fire with a delay, so it doesn't just fire 8 missiles at once and overwhelm our own AI with the amount of processing power that's required. But anyways, moving on from that. So now I'm putting in the anti-submarine weaponry. This thing had the same 8-barreled anti-submarine rocket launcher that a lot of other Navy ships have. So you've already seen this thing before. Slap it onto the deck, then I use a pole mimic to make the circle around it that basically says don't go inside this circle when the turret is rotating or you'll get smacked. Set that up, connect it to a missile controller down in the hull. And there's a lot of me going around in the hull and finding empty space to put in missile controllers because this is such a missile-heavy ship. And all the missile systems are operating independent from each other. I believe this thing ends up having like 5 separate missile systems running. And then I go ahead and build the other anti-aircraft missiles. So these were the Tardar missiles, which was more of a medium-range anti-aircraft missile. The Talos was intended to be very long-range. And these also use semi-active radar homing, but because remote guidance isn't great against small targets in From the Depths, remote guidance in From the Depths is effectively the same as command guidance in real life, which is just someone on the ground is basically giving the instructions where to go, instructions to the missile where to go, which gets less accurate the further you get from the target, obviously, because whoever's giving instructions on the ground, in this case, your ship's AI, the detection on the target becomes more sketchy the further it gets from you. Whereas semi-active radar homing, as the missile approaches the target, the reflection of radar off the target gets more and more concentrated, so the missile is able to home in more as it approaches the target. Anyways, That's not a thing in From the Depths. So I just decide, I'll make these infrared. So they're infrared homing, hooked up to the secondary AI. Very simple. I don't bother to spin clip more missiles into these because it doesn't matter that they're incredibly powerful, really, that the reload's super short. They're really just there to shoot down any fighter aircraft, and hopefully 1 or 2 hits from them would be able to disable whatever Steel Strider's jet or whatever it is that's attacking this. So I set up the missile real quick, APN guidance, infrared seeker, bit of explosive, try to make it decently fast and long range. The idea is these things would be able to intercept any jets before the jets are able to fire off their offensive weaponry. And then I just save the sub-object, paste it on the other side, and I just go in and set the firing restrictions so that you don't, have missiles being fired into our own superstructure. And then after that, I install the 5-inch guns, which this ship had 2 5-inch guns. They were the 5-inch 38 type that was used heavily during World War II. So nowhere as powerful as like the Mark 45 5-inch gun that I put on the Spruance class that I built. Kind of skip over the whole build and installation process because it wasn't that exciting. And also, I don't want this video to run for hours. But I do put some decorations on this in the form of literally looking up the mesh that's on the simple weapon 3.7-inch AA gun. I literally just get that mesh, copy, paste it, and then slap it on the back of this to make like a kind of bootleg seating arrangement for the crew who would be on there firing the gun. So once again, it's not like the most detailed way to do it, but it works. And then I start working on the tops of the funnels, which are kind of like masts. You see I've built little vents kind of on the side, which would be where the actual exhaust gases exit, and that way the top of the funnel would be cleared up for having radar equipment on it and stuff. And I use a bit of decorations here just to smooth out the transition between the alloy plates and the funnel itself. But once again, nothing overkill. Just putting in these platforms and things, adding some little applique panels and railings and such. And I do use Photo Measure Tool heavily here because it's just nice to know the exact heights of everything. Makes everything feel nice and proportional, whatever the word is. And one of the biggest issues with realistic builds in FTD, if you're building something that's maybe Cold War era that has a lot of radar equipment and stuff high up on masts like these masts really get, these are not very sturdy. I mean, it's made out of steam pipes and alloy poles. So getting your detection blown off is an issue, but on a ship like this where you have these radars up on the masts, plus you have a sonar array below the water, plus you have the targeting radars for the Talos missile, and then secondary targeting radars for the Tartar missiles, and some tracking radars, really the odds of getting a complete detection kill are low. You'd have to get the whole top of your ship stripped off before anything like that happened. But yeah, I put some, use these railings to mimic the wireless meshes, and then paste those all over the mast. And I will soon here copy-paste in, I forget if I copy-paste in another ship and steal it, or just make one, but basically using a ladder, you can make a pretty convincing railing just by stretching out the mesh with decorations. And then you see I put alloy plates here, which I do for a lot of my builds, but then I go back and realize that they didn't use like a solid metal wall here. They used a more traditional railing made out of tubes or bars or whatever. So I end up going back and deleting those actually, and replacing them with the mimicked railing, or the decoed railing. And I do use some decos here to get things to line up, just obviously because the plate is counted as a full block. Oh yeah, so here is what I do. I just take a ladder and I stretch it out. and that's it. And then I copy paste this all over the superstructure for use as railings. So that's pretty convenient if you don't want since the in-game railings have the bottom part that hangs down. If you're building something with alloy plates or another type of thin platform and you don't want that hanging down and looking bad, just take a ladder and do this. And then you see, soon enough, I will place this on a slope once I'm done filling out all the flat edges. And I just turn it 45 degrees, line it up, stretch it out a bit. Not that bad of deco work. And then I go back to copy pasting it all over creation. So there you go. Copy paste this onto every slanted bit, and that's really all there is to it, to railings and balconies. And as I'm putting in these details, I'll do some, I leave room for like ladders and stairs in a couple of these spots. And yeah, now we're getting to the part of the build where almost all of the ship's functional components are finished, and I'm really just decorating. And towards the end of the video, I do cut out a huge amount of decorating because it's not incredibly entertaining. There's not a whole lot of value to get out of it that you couldn't get with a very short, I don't know, explanation. Oh, so I do put in... I'm not sure what these were in real life, honestly. I believe they were radar countermeasure systems, and all my other ships I had put ECM jammers, but I don't do that for Albany because she's old, and I figured she wouldn't have that technology, but maybe she did. I don't know, maybe I'll go back and add that after the video. I put some steam pipes and stuff on the funnels just for extra detail to add that little bit of realism and I don't know, lifelikeness. So now I put in the air tracking radar, which is at the back. And once again, like, this is literally just a 360 radar with a huge ton of crap stuck onto it. So I get some railings and I stretch them out. Actually, I'm deleting this. I just position these railings with decos and then I copy paste it all over the whole thing. And apparently, this rotation rate is in radians per second. So I set it to 1 radian per second, expecting 1 rotation per second, but that's not true because it's in radians as in like the unit circle. So actually if I wanted it to rotate once per second, I would have to put in, what, 3.14? No, because it's pi. I want 2 pi, so I'd have to put in 6.28 radians per second. There you go. You've been... See, I thought I could escape math by playing from the depths, but wrong. So I replace those with just flattened truss blocks, which looks better in my opinion. And then I go on to build the forward... I believe this is another tracking radar. I ended up Googling a bunch of photos of this so I can see what it looks like, because none of the pictures of actual Albany herself are very clear. And I spend all that time looking for a good representation just to squash a radiator and slap it onto an IR camera. So then I spawn in spruance to seal her windows, because I don't feel like doing this again. But the windows are very simple. I just took the window block and slapped it as a decoration onto whatever pane it is. I do end up having to stretch these out anyways because of the slanted glass, but it's not that big of a deal. Once I have that done, I copy paste it, and then I steal the flat plates and put them all over the bridge. And so now I'm just putting on some of the final details of the superstructure. And yeah, so I skipped through a bunch of decorating, and now I put in the propulsion, which I probably should have put this in earlier, but you know, whatever. I believe Albany had twin rudders, that's what I do, as well as some propellers, and I'm using the new large rudder system, which is really powerful. It actually ends up being a little bit too powerful, because anytime she turns, it torques the ship massively. And so then I really quick cut to doing the bridge. If you didn't know this, by the way, if you stack glass that's different colored, whichever block is facing your character is the one that the entire array will appear as. So I put clear glass on the inside, and it allows me to see through the black colored glass on the outside. So you can make pretty effective one-way glass by doing that. But I put a little bit of effort into the interior of the bridge. I don't do an interior for any other part of the ship. I do slap some doors all over the superstructure though, just to make it look better. And now that I have that, I decide that, because the current issue I was having was when as I turn the ship, see, I speed up a bit, and I did do some cheatiness with these propellers. Those are propellers on spin blocks. So, yeah. But yeah, look at the list on this thing as I'm turning. So I decided I'm going to put in stabilization to help, even though I already have propellers on, that you can see them firing down at the bottom of the ship. It still rolls incessantly. So I put on bilge keels, and I'm just going for a very long bilge keel there, which helps the roll somewhat. It still leans a bit, but I think it's fine. So putting in some bilge keels that are actually just large rudders that will counteract the roll. It slows the ship down a lot when she's turning, unfortunately, but it is, you know, it is what it is, I guess. And then I put out more propellers on steam pipes, which I make some little metal supports with decorations here, nothing too complex. And yeah, so I have the actual propellers on steam pipes out there that, well, they provide some thrust. Not a lot compared to the amount of spin block cheese going on inside of the craft. So, I did some decorating off camera, obviously. I figured I wouldn't show that, but I did want to go over it while watching someone go through just placing, you know, deck clutter down isn't the most enjoyable thing. I did think I would go in and point out a few things. And a lot of this is just how far just utilizing, you know, just base in-game blocks goes. You know, a lot of people think if you want to build a very realistic, nice-looking ship, you have to go heavy with mimics and decorations. But honestly, you really don't. I mean, if you just go in with the basic blocks, like a lot of this deck clutter and stuff that from far away makes the ship look extremely complex, is really super simple. Like, you know, just placing steam pipes down in the right spots. I mean, this is literally just, what, an alloy pole and 2 plates. You got applique panels here that could look like storage lockers. You got the built-in bulkhead door blocks, alloy poles. All of it works really well together to give your ship, you know, a livable, realistic ship look that it looks like, you know, people could serve on this. So you don't honestly, like, if you're watching this and you're like, man, you know, I'm not that good at using mimics, I don't have a lot of experience with decorations, you know, I can't see myself building something that realistic, you really, you know, you don't need that experience. I mean, look at these lifeboats I made. Sure, I kind of rushed through it a bit. I was trying to get this build finished. But, I mean, this is the most simple wooden lifeboat and some steam pipes in there to make it look like it's supported by something. I mean, like, you got balconies here, that's just some alloy plates. I mean, sure, I did use a decoration here or there to make it line up seamlessly, but it's nothing complex. It's just an alloy plate. These lifeboats, or not lifeboats, ship's boats towards the rear. I mean, it's just a crudely constructed wooden boat-shaped thing. It's got a steam pipe and an exhaust pipe to look like exhaust, and then it's got truss blocks up here and some balcony with some very, very simple railings. So just adding in the little details, you know, applique panels that look like hatches and stairways and things, or maybe steam pipes to look like air vent ducts from from far away, and even from not that far away, I mean, even from here, this ship still looks decent. They really go a long way to making your builds just have that extra bit of polish and realism. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, and yeah, this is completed USS Albany. She will be on the Steam Workshop. I'll put a link in the video description, so if you'd like to check her out and run tests with her, nuke her, throw her off of a cliff at Mach speed, you know, do whatever you want. So the link will be available to download. Hopefully she'll make appearance in United States Navy versus Neater if I am able to record more of that, which hopefully I do, but I don't know. I've been distracted and busy, and you know, college stuff takes up a bunch of time. But anyways, that's the ship. I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, hopefully you'll see her again in more videos, demolishing some Lightning Hood's craft. But anyways, this has been the USS Albany speed build. Thanks for tuning in.